Rob on the mic, spitting truth from the heights. Queens unite under stadium lights. Bright nights, 7 train rides. Dreams born in the real hum. Brooklyn to Queens, yeah, we all about that outcome. This our time, this our cheer. Mets talk loud, bring the hype, make it clear. From the boroughs to the field, this our year. Queens in the house, let the world hear. From Flushing Meadows, echoes bounce off the bat. Rob calls, take the mic, snaps like a thunderclap. Home runs over bridges, no gaps in the story. Mets rise, reclaiming the glory. 7 the city, blue and orange army swarm. Summer vibe electric, love in every form. From Biggie's blocks to Flushing's heartbeat. Our anthem loud, no retreat. This our time, this our cheer. Mets talk loud, bring the hype, make it clear. From the boroughs to the field, this our year. Queens in the house, let the world hear. The apple pops in the outfield, city of dreams. Rob's voice over static, Mets on every stream. White lines mapped out the future, vividly. From shade to city, the journey's never gimmicky.
What's up, Mets fans? Welcome to a hot stove edition of Mets Talk Live right here on the channel and on X. And boy, do we got reports to talk about tonight, as very interesting starting pitching is finally predicted to be on the market. And many reports, it's not just one reporter or two reporters, it's multiple reporters. Multiple reporters continue to report that Joe Ryan of the Minnesota Twins is available via trade. That is what's reported, guys. And this is the most important thing here, is the fact that names have been mentioned. And if you go back to the Brandon Nimmo situation, and this is a very similar situation to a Byron Buxton no trade clause. It was weird when that list came out of potential available trade pieces, that a list for the Mets of possible guys that can be traded, and Nimmo topped the list. That was weird because everybody's like, come on, they're not trading Nimmo. Nimmo is not going to accept the trade. And, it kind of was talked about more and more. And, we heard about the Rangers and Corey Seager was a possibility. We didn't really hear anything about Semien. And a couple of days after that list came out, Nimmo got traded. So going back to this situation right now, with the possibility of Joe Ryan and Byron Buxton be a package deal, there's way too much smoke. You heard a name of Jonah Tong being, top of the list of what the Twins would like in a potential trade. You're hearing names. You're hearing Byron Buxton being in the mix in this trade. It just it really does tell me that the Twins already spoke to Byron Buxton. I understand, because if you go back to the offseason, the middle of the season during the trade deadline, and you heard about the Mets looking for a center fielder, they talked to the Twins about Buxton, and then reports came out that Buxton did not want to waive his no trade clause. But if you listened and look at the reporting about what Buxton said, he said that he didn't want to uproot his family in the middle of the season. That is what he said. And people completely turned what he said into, I'm not going anywhere, I'm staying in Minnesota. If you read his direct quote, you can find this. You Google what his quote was at the trade deadline. He did not want to uproot his family mid-season. That was why he wasn't approving a trade to another team. It wasn't about him saying, I'm not going anywhere, I want to be in Minnesota, or he didn't want to go to a particular team. That was never said. When they asked him, he specifically said, and he said a lot, but during that whole conversation, he did say he didn't want to uproot his family mid-season. And, in some cases, you can understand that as a person who has a family. And, it's not easy to uproot a family. I don't care if you have millions of dollars. He has kids. Kids were probably still in school or, just got out of school, having summer, going on and stuff like that. So it's understandable. So, with that said, I think it's very similar to with the Nimmo situation. You're hearing more and more rumors about this. I mean, this took off like a lightning rod. Like you saw one report, I think it might have been John Heyman that reported that the Twins are listening to deals and possibly trading Joe Ryan, and then other reports came out basically saying the same thing. And then into the more reports that you hear, Byron Buxton seems to be a potential situation in the deal. And this is what I'm going to say right here. With Joe Ryan making basically no money for the next 3 years, Byron Buxton making what, $14-15 million? It's really not do that. Byron Buxton being a part of it and making what, $14-15 million. It's not that much of a problem because, and also you got to think about the whole trade situation, right? If you take Byron Buxton's contract, even though it doesn't sound like a lot of money, we know the Minnesota Twins are definitely, looking to shed payroll. And if they can add that quote unquote bad contract with Joe Ryan, you would have to assume it's not going to be the haul if Joe Ryan was the only one in the deal. If Joe Ryan was the only one in the deal with 3 years left of control, guess what's going to happen? You're going to have to pay more. So I think the Byron Buxton kind of lowers the asking price for a trade. That's why when you heard the name Jonah Tong, then you see other people doing like proposals and stuff like that. But it'll probably take I would say 2 top 10 prospects and maybe a lower level prospect, because you are taking on that money. You are taking on those extra couple of years of Byron Buxton, which is something to even look at, right? Yeah, $50 million is chump change. I mean, Brandon Nimmo was getting more of that. Brandon Nimmo was getting paid as a center fielder, now a left fielder. So, Nimmo was making $20+ million, where Buxton, who is probably the better player, but the problem with him is the injuries. Last year was the most amount of games he's played in, 4 or 5 years, maybe 6 years. He played 126 games, if I'm not mistaken. I have that right here really quick. I think he played, 126 games. And that's the most he played since 2017. So almost 9 years, 8 years. So it's a tough decision because of his injury history. Now, the good thing about it is that I think that he can, he did find another therapy or some, medical thing that he can put along his back or his spine, where it helped him out for the most part. But he played 126 games. He did miss a good amount of games, but he hit 35 home runs and 83 RBIs in 126 games. This guy is an all-star caliber player. He is that good when he's on the field. Now, to combat that, it's similar to what the Brandon Nimmo situation is. If the Mets couldn't trade him, you could see Brandon Nimmo DHing more than actually playing left field. The same thing goes for Byron Buxton. I'm not saying don't play him in center field, but you do have Tyrone Taylor. There is no reason why you can't DH Byron Buxton more often and play him occasionally in center field. But you have Tyrone Taylor there. You can put him in center field and solidify that defense and make sure that you keep Byron Buxton as healthy as possible. That is where you have to make sure that you keep him healthy. That is the main goal, because he is a beast. That is a bat that is, could we be honest, guys? This guy can easily hit 40 home runs. That is how good Byron Buxton is. I mean, in 126 games, he hit 35 home runs. Like, he has 18 home runs, 17 home runs. That's in 102 games, 85 games. He has 28 home runs in 92 games in the last couple of seasons. So the guy can hit 35 to 40 home runs. And Truman, you could say none of this is scaring the Dodgers, but I'm not worried about that. I am not. Like, let's get to the point of facing the Dodgers. Like, the Dodgers aren't invincible. Okay, they are back-to-back champions, but they're not invincible. All right, they can not be scared if they want. Well, the Mets aren't going to have 7 DHs because why would they have 7 DHs? They don't have a DH right now. They don't have a DH. So, and look, the fact is that it's going to be interesting to see when it comes to this possible trade. Again, obviously, the trade of this trade happening is because of Joe Ryan. You know, we're overly concerned about Byron Buxton, but Joe Ryan is the prize. You know, Buxton is, you know, quote unquote, the throw-in in a contract situation, a bad contract that you would take on. You know, what would you rather do? Would you rather take Skubal and Baez's contract or Joe Ryan and Buxton's contract? Because that's probably what it's going to be. Like, it can't be more than that. It really can't. You know, that's all. It's either going to be that trade or it's going to be this trade. It's up to you to decide. Now, I'm in the area of saying I go the Skubal and Baez route only because Baez can play center field. You know, you link them back up with Lindor. And I think Baez, especially last year, kind of, you know, grew up, to be quite honest with you. You know, saying he went to Hinch and says that, hey, listen, you know I'm not the player that I was, you know, 5, 6, 7 years ago. He goes, but I'm going to do anything to help this team win. And they said, okay, great, get a glove and go play center field. And he did that, and he did it well. So it's just a matter of what are you willing to do. Now, Skubal's going to cost more. We all know that, even though he's a rental. But it's a matter of what do you want more? Do you want a guy in Joe Ryan who pitched to a 3.48 ERA this past season, and you know, an often injured Byron Buxton, who's a great player, but when he's on the field, so it is a lot to, you know, juggle right here. It's either Tariq Skubal, who is no doubt the best pitcher in baseball, and you have to take that Baez contract, which isn't a lot, but he's not the same player he was, you know, 6, 7 years ago. That's what you have to figure out. And this is why, you know, with Skubal, obviously you got to pay more prospect-wise. So that's something that you probably have to worry about. And also, you know, you also got to sign Skubal as well. So there's a lot of moving parts and there's a lot of issues with both of them, right? I don't think any of them is 100% like bulletproof. I think there's risk on both sides. There is a risk bringing back Javi Baez with Lindor. There is a risk of bringing Tariq Skubal as a rental and then losing him and getting stuck with Baez and losing out on Skubal the following year. So, and with Joe Ryan, you know, yeah, he probably will be the best pitcher on the Mets, at least, you know, if that trade happens at the current moment. But is he an ace? Now, he is better than everybody else on the Mets rotation, so you would say obviously. But he is a guy that still hasn't come completely to what people expected of him. So that's a risk there. And as I said, Byron Buxton is walking wounded. This guy doesn't stay healthy. He played the most games he's ever had this year in 126 games, and he hasn't done that since he played 140 in 2017. You know, it's nearly an 8-9 year gap. So that is very worrisome. If you want this guy to be a potential big bat in the lineup and play center field every day, it's probably not going to happen. So that is a huge risk. That is where you're going to have to probably use the DH more often than not. But here's the caveat to that. Can you sign Pete Alonso back and play him at first base every day? Because there is no mistake about it. David Stearns doesn't want Pete Alonso to play first base every day. He wants him to basically be a DH more often than not. So you can't have Byron Buxton and Pete Alonso on this team unless you're going to play Pete Alonso at first base every day. Now, some methods are going to say, well, why not? Well, okay. But your GM or your president of baseball ops has been talking about run prevention since his exit interview at the end of the season. And he's talked about that. Pete Alonso, when it comes to run prevention, isn't good. Look at the metrics when it comes to run prevention. Scooping baseballs isn't a very big part of the run prevention category. It's just not, right? Throwing 2 bases, catching balls and being more decisive of what you're going to do with the ball is a problem for Pete Alonso. So that is an issue, and it's going to take a lot of it. It's going to be very interesting because does that take you out of Cody Bellinger? I still don't think it does. Because now the Mets with Simeon, and if they do get Buxton, you got 2 right-handed bats in here now. You probably need a lefty to put back in the lineup. Cody Bellinger fits that way. Only $14-15 million for Buxton. Joe Ryan basically making nothing. That leaves you very open to sign a guy like Cody Bellinger who can play first base and left field. And you allow DH to be open for Byron Buxton to do what you want. Bellinger plays center field, Tyrone Taylor plays left, whatever it might be. There's options there. When you sign Pete Alonso, there is no option. Like, he's going to have to play first base every day because you got to play Buxton very limited in center field. You probably have to play Tyrone Taylor in center field. So what does that do? That kind of blocks you from getting Cody Bellinger. It definitely takes you. You're not going to get Tucker. So what does that mean? Carson Bench is going to get the opportunity to play left field or center field? I mean, that's what you're looking at here. So let me ask you, if you trade for Joe Ryan and Byron Buxton, but you sign Cody Bellinger, not Pete Alonso, what is the better roster construction? Because way too many people only care about, what about this guy and how much, how are you going to, rep or, copy the production you get from Pete Alonso or this guy or that guy? Can we worry about roster construction before we worry about what this guy's going to do, compared to this guy? Because the roster construction was a complete shit show last year. I talked about it all season, and it was just a disaster. Mendoza had no idea what to do with that roster because the roster sucked. The roster was not put together correctly, and it was just terrible. When you have so many guys playing the same positions, it's hard to play all those guys. You were playing guys out of positions to have other people play. It was just stupid. You can't have that situation again. You can't have the situation of Pete Alonso and Byron Buxton on the same team and be like, okay, well, I got to protect Byron Buxton and his injuries, and I got to DH him. But you don't want Pete Alonso at first base because of the defensive discrepancies. That is what you have to do. Like, that's what you have to consider here. So it's interesting. And committee, what? That's the idea. Let me see if I can click these comments because there we go. Perfect. All right, now I can click comments. We're in good shape here. So yeah, one of these prospects has to be the truth. And you know what? I hope it's Carson Bench because he's the one guy the Mets clearly don't want to trade. I mean, Bench could be in a Scooble deal. So again, this is a situation where that's why the Mets have to work quickly here. And I think this is what's going to happen. Like, trading Nimmo for Simeon and then signing Devin Williams. David Stearns is working a lot quicker in bigger moves than he was last year. Like, Frankie Montas wasn't a big move. Clay Holmes wasn't a big move because it would have been a big move if he was a bullpen addition, but he wasn't. He was considered a sign-in for the starting rotation. So it was a weird sign-in, but it was aggressive on the low end of the pitching spectrum. This isn't low end. None of these moves were low end. The Brandon Nimmo trade was a big deal. The Devin Williams signing was a big deal. These are top guys that, have championships, had good seasons. These are guys that, was a top closer in baseball 2 years ago. And one of the best closers in baseball for the last 4. Except last year when he lost his closer role, but became a good setup guy. So it's a lot to, digest. It really is. And that is why you have to work quickly if you're David Stearns. You can't be playing this game of, waiting around and try to, manipulate the market and think that, just sign this guy and that guy, or trade for this guy and sign this guy and put the team together. You got to make sure it works on a 162 game basis. Because the problem with the Mets is the fact that some guys are not good defensively, and you would probably like to keep their bat in the lineup, so you would DH them. You can't have 2 or 3 guys that you need to be in the DH hole. You just can't. You can't have Pete Alonso on this team and Byron Buxton. Sorry to burst everybody's bubble if you're a Pete Alonso fan, but this trade probably takes Pete Alonso out of the possibility. Cody Bellinger probably makes more sense at that point. So, well, Mark Green, all right, let's just talk about that real quick. You got to be out of your mind to call Buxton contract a bad contract, right? Was $18 million a year a bad contract for Frankie Montas, right? Because pitchers are getting, even bad pitchers are getting, $10 million, right? Why is Buxton a bad deal? Because he's getting paid $15 million to play less than 100 games. He finally played 126 games this year, but hasn't played 100 games since 2017. So it is a bad deal. Now, the production you get if he's healthy is a damn bargain. But you can't just say that trade's great because Buxton's got to stay healthy. And oh, by the way, last time I checked, and we're going to look right here, he's 31 years old, turning 32. So why do we just assume he's going to remain healthy playing center field every day? So it's not a bad contract when you look at the pure, star power that he is when healthy. But make no mistake about it, he doesn't play enough. The Mets got to do a very, very meticulous job keeping this guy healthy, and that requires the DH more often than not. And with the whole situation of Pete Alonso and David Stearns, and you hear the reporting saying that the Mets don't want to play Pete Alonso at first base every day. They want him to use him as a DH. Byron Buxton is going to take up that DH spot more often than not. So that means you're playing Pete Alonso at first base. Now, if David Stearns goes back on his word and says, all right, whatever, let's get another big bat in here with Pete Alonso, then it is what it is. We just have to, figure out if Pete Alonso doesn't, screw up throws and, gets himself in bad situations on the field. Like that's what you have to worry about. So, bringing in Simeon, who is very good defensively, and now you shore up up the middle, who knows who's going to be the third baseman. At the moment, I think it's Brett Beatty right now, considering the roster isn't, put together yet. Right now, it's Brett Beatty. So you got to be careful here about the roster construction. You can't have a roster that is constructed like it was last year and think it's going to be successful. It didn't work. You can't do the same thing and mess up and block potential positions that you wanted one player to do. Like, no doubt David Stearns wants Pete Alonso to DH more than play first base, or at least enough, and put a better defensive first baseman in. You can't do that with Buxton on the roster also. Somebody's going to be playing first or center field more often than not. That is a problem. Byron Buxton could get injured more often or more likely if he plays center field more. And Pete Alonso would be the butcher he is at first base. So it's a lose-lose here. That's why I think if you make this deal, say sayonara to Pete Alonso. And yes, I just made a Japanese term because watch for Okamoto to show up. Or you sign Cody Bellinger, who can play every outfield position and first base. Like that is the idea. So you have to be careful with the roster construction here. All right. Let's see. Just checking the comments really quick. Yeah, Truman. Devin Williams had a 5 ERA. Yes. But again, a lot of that bloated ERA was when he was the closer. Look at his numbers when he became the 6th, 7th, 8th inning specifically the 7th and 8th inning guy. He performed better. In the second half, he performed better. We all know how the ERA works. If you have a decent amount of innings, which Devin Williams had as a closer, it's very hard with limited innings worked to change that ERA to a massive plus. It's hard to change a 5 ERA to a 2 ERA or 2.5 ERA when you're only pitching an inning a day or 4 or 5 innings a week. It is. Or maybe 1 or 2 batters or 1 batter a day. So, look, Devin Williams was a top closer 2 years ago. He performed better in the second half and found his way in the bridge to a Luke Weaver or at that end of the season, Bednar. He kind of fit in that role. So, yeah, the ERA is a problem, but look at the circumstances and look what he did in the second half and when he became the 8th, 7th, 8th inning guy. Sal, I also agree with you. I don't like the whole, platoon DH. The Mets, since it's been implemented, have not had a DH. Ever. A good one. I understand the logic of, let's use the DH for a guy who can't play the field much because of potential injury. And that was the idea. This is the idea with Buxton and the same idea the Mets were having with Nimmo if they didn't trade him. But in this situation, it depends, right? If the Mets sign Kyle Schwarber and bring and trade for like a Joe Ryan, Byron Buxton, well, you kind of solve an issue there, right? Because now Schwarber will be a DH. You got to send a fielder, but again, the Byron Buxton situation again clogs up the issue. That means Buxton is playing center field more, which is more of a risk of an injury. Kyle Schwarber isn't playing left field. He could play it once or twice in a pickle, but he's not an everyday outfielder. So that is something that you have to be concerned about. So we come back to roster construction, right? Kyle Schwarber signing makes no sense if you're going to go the Joe Ryan Buxton deal, because that means you're counting on Buxton to be healthy for the majority of the year in center field mostly. I think we can all agree here that's probably not going to be a good idea. And yes, Buxton isn't making a ton of money, So, let me just double check really quick his contract. Really quick. Let me just double check here. All right. Let's see, contract. All right, here we go. So he did sign a 7-year deal a few years ago. So he has, that's not bad. He has 3 years left on his contract. So it'd be similar to Joe Ryan. So both of these guys would be a free agent at the same time. But you are talking about the 32, 33, and 34-year-old years of Byron Buxton, making a little over $15 million a year. So, it's a tough spot to be in because, again, you get Joe Ryan and Byron Buxton, say goodbye to Pete Alonso, and say goodbye to Kyle Schwarber as a potential big bat. Cody Bellinger seems like the more likely scenario and the more better roster player for the roster construction. Like that is what we're talking about here. So, one's going to play into one move is going to play into the other. And that is where David Stearns has got to choose. Can you do a Pete Alonso and Buxton or Pete Alonso and Bellinger? You could do that because Bellinger could play outfield every day. But the whole run prevention thing kind of is like, well, you're putting Pete Alonso back at first base. So it is a lot of moving parts. It is a lot of issues that each move could potentially have with another potential move that you could make. So that is the conundrum that David Stearns is in right now. But in my opinion, I always talk about David Stearns not being decisive. I don't care what he does. Now, I'm going to have my opinion about it, moves-wise, signing-wise, or trade-wise, but I want him to be decisive. If you think Joe Ryan is the best option for this starting rotation, and that's his belief, go get him. Stop playing around. If you think Skubal is that guy, go get him. If you think the Joe Ryan Buxton combination works and that's what you want to do it. That's why I like the fact that obviously the Brandon Nimmo Simeon trade wasn't a 1-for-1 in one's replacing the other. It was because it was a decisive move. Talked about run prevention, talked about Nimmo being more of a DH type of guy. So you're paying $20+ million for a DH who is a guy who can't play the field anymore. He's a guy who finally hit 25 home runs. Like, if you're going to pay that much money, I'd rather give $25 million a year to a Kyle Schwarber who hits 45 bombs. So that's why I like the decisiveness of what Stearns has done so far. It's early in the offseason, right? The Nimmo trade was decisive. He made that deal because he wanted better defense at a position that was a problem. And second base, let's be honest, was a problem. And now you solidify second base. Yeah, you have an open spot in left field, but everybody believes that they're going to get an outfielder somehow, some way, whichever it might be, sign in or trade. And the Devin Williams deal was decisive. It did two things. It protected you just in case Diaz goes elsewhere. But it's also a potential super back of the bullpen if you do sign Diaz with Devin Williams. They made the Devin Williams moves like that. He didn't play. He wanted Devin Williams. He got him. Decisive. 2 times this year, offseason already, 2 decisive a trade and a sign-in was a decisive move because what he talked about and what he wants to do, he's doing, and he's decisive. Last offseason, I don't feel like he was decisive. Especially last trade deadline, he was hesitant. I can't have a president of baseball ops who's running the team being hesitant. You want the guy, go get him. That's it. It's not complicated, guys. We overvalue our prospects, and it seems like it bites us in the ass every single time. Right? I was pissed off in last offseason that Stearns was talking to the White Sox in regards to Garrett Crochet. And everybody was like, well, why would you get Garrett Crochet? He didn't pitch that many innings. And would he sign an extension? Guess what he did? He pitched a tremendous amount of innings, and he signed an extension. That was one fail of David Stearns. So, and to, basically make up for that stupid mistake, let's sign Montas, Holmes, and Minaya and Griffin Cannon and call it a day. And we all know how that turned out. So this is where David Stearns' decisiveness is going to dictate how good of an offseason the New York Mets are going to have, in my opinion. Let's get back to the comments until we head to the next topic. All right, let's see. Mike, I agree. That was why at the trade deadline, if you go back to the trade deadline watch parties, I said every time, you can't have Mauricio, you can't have Acuna, you can't have Beatty, you can't have Vientos, all 4 on this roster coming out of the deadline. You have to definitely trade 1, but it'd be ideal to trade 2 because now Mendoza can say, okay, I got this guy and that guy. Now I can play them more often. I'm not sitting 2 guys on the bench every single day. It was stupid. And what happened? After the deadline, let's not get no starting pitcher. Let's get the bullpen arms, which not a lot of people complained about those moves. They were on paper solid moves. It just didn't work out. But what the Mets needed at the end of the day was even a solid to, somewhat reliable starting pitcher. And they also probably could have used, a bat. And they didn't really do any of that. So, they needed a center fielder. They decided to go get Cedric Mullins, which they should have got Luis Robert, who had a better second half. Not a great second half by any means, but he had a better second half. But he plays tremendous defense. He has a lot of speed, and that is something that you could have done. And you did none of that. You brought in Cedric Mullins. You brought in 3 guys in the relievers for 12 prospects. And it was just a shit show. So this is why the roster construction is very important. Very important. All right. Let's see. And Aaron, yes, Byron Buxton did play center field last year. And I'm glad he stayed somewhat healthy. But he did miss, 36, 34 games last year? Again, I take 126 games from Byron Buxton. That's a win. But come on, guys. Let's be a little smart about this. He's going to be 32 years old playing center field. Like, more likely, he'll probably miss more games. Like, that's the problem. That is why when you're looking at roster construction and you don't want to handcuff your manager. Last year, David Stearns, with the roster construction, handcuffed his manager. Not only did Mendoza had to win games, he had a terrible rotation. He had a constant movable bullpen that was different players every day. And he had a position player roster that was just a logjam. Like, you know how hard it was to manage that team last year? And yet everybody blamed Mendoza for all these problems. Like, I'm not saying Mendoza had a good year by any means, but I don't care who the hell you are. There is no manager that could have managed that team successfully, especially with the roster that they put on the field. It's very hard to do that. Now, I'm not giving any credit to Mendoza because there's some moves that I was like, what are you doing here? But, when you have prospects that are sitting on the bench, you feel obligated to play those guys over other guys. And then other guys are sitting. So it was just it was such a shit show where it can't happen like that again. And with the Byron Buxton situation, I'd love for him to play 140 games in center field. But I'm realistic. He hasn't done that since 2017. Last year was the most amount of games he's played since 2017. That's a problem, especially if you're thinking about bringing back Pete Alonso. Because you can't say, well, I'm looking for Pete Alonso to DH more, but you got Buxton now, who is a guy who is at risk of getting injured playing center field. That is a roster construction problem. Yeah, you can just play Pete at first base, but David Stearns is going against his word about run prevention. And you're not talking about DH and Diaz some of the time and going against your word because that's indecisive. Now you're doing something that you didn't want to do because it appeases the fans. Let's be honest about that. If it was up to David Stearns with no emotional situation with the fans, Pete Alonso would not be a talking point at all. Pete Alonso was a talking point because of the fans, because of the possibility of losing another homegrown guy that everybody seems to care about. So we got to be careful about, again, the emotional attachment I get as fans towards certain players, but you get emotionally attached on guys who have won nothing for your team, regardless if they're homegrown or not. So, and that annoys me. I don't care about that. I really don't. I want to win. I don't care who's on my team and who wins for us. I really don't. Yeah, is it more like, does it might feel better? I'm sorry. Let's put it this way. We can have a 26-man roster of 25 guys that weren't homegrown. If we win a championship, do you really think I'm going to sour on that championship because we didn't have enough homegrown guys? I'm not. Now, people will because I truly believe this, and I'm throwing it towards Met fans more than other fans because I'm connected with Met fans. I am one of them. There is too many Met fans that would rather have homegrown talent and lose than having better players and win. I truly believe that. And that's sad. And I've talked about it. I have had conversations with fans when I went to Citi Field, other stadiums that I've seen people who subscribe to the channel. They came up to me and be like, why are you so sour on homegrown guys or sour on Pete Alonso? It's not that I don't like Pete Alonso. It's just that stop overvaluing players, and not just Pete Alonso, but in general, because the rest of the league sees it totally opposite. Why, again, in back-to-back free agent years for Pete Alonso, that there isn't more teams in on Pete Alonso. He's a premier power hitter, yet Kyle Schwarber is going to get a good deal, a really good deal, probably a 4-year deal. Cody Bellinger is going to get a bigger deal, probably than Pete Alonso. More years, definitely. And these guys are different players, but Pete Alonso is one of those best guys on the market. So why is only we hear the Mets and the Red Sox are the teams that are in on Pete Alonso? Why isn't it like 5 or 6 teams? When you hear Bellinger, 5 or 6 teams, Schwarber, 5 or 6 teams, other guys, 4, 5, 6 teams. There's a reason for that. And I said this for years now, that the perception of Met fans towards Pete Alonso is a lot different around the league towards Pete Alonso than Met fans. And yes, we have a soft spot in our heart for Pete Alonso because he's homegrown. He's a good guy, and nothing against him. But there's a reason why teams are not lining up to sign him. And it's a very minimal amount of teams. There's a reason for that. Look at the bigger picture. All right. Well, Hakeem has to say, thank you for the super chat. By the way, Trevor Lindor, he's too goofy for New York City and is a cancer on the team. Let Williams and Acuna compete for the spot in spring training. Yeah, no. No. Okay. Luis Acuna can't hit a baseball. And don't talk to me about the winter, the winter league that he plays in, that he's hitting home runs. Those guys are has-beens, and most guys are not good, especially the pitchers. All right, I don't want to hear. Acuna can't hit for average. He's a guy that has tremendous amount of speed, but doesn't use his ability with his speed to make sure he gets on base more. So that's a no. His defense, fine, no problem. Jet Williams is a prospect. Jet Williams is an unknown. You're going to put one of your most important positions on the field with an unknown. Not happening. And, it's funny how people sour right away on Francisco Lindor, yet he was the one that carried this team in 2024 when Pete Alonso was having a bad season, sulking in the corner. So he isn't goofy. He smiles. He laughs. The same reason why people like Brandon Nimmo, because he smiles and laughs. Yet, I ain't crying a river for Brandon Nimmo. So, no, you're not trading Francisco Lindor. It doesn't make sense to get rid of one of the better shortstops in the game, and the guy still knocks in 30-yard home runs and 90 RBIs. I can assure you Jet Williams and Acuna is probably not doing that specifically in the next year or two. I'd be shocked. All right, let's keep going. All right, so once again, it all entails with more about center field with the possibility of the Mets showing interest in Luis Robert Jr. I wanted him at the trade deadline. I said it. I was adamant about that. I wanted him at the deadline. I think a change of scenery would be huge for him. But now I think it's too much of a risk to trade for Luis Robert Jr. There's reports that, the White Sox are eyeing Acuna as a potential target in that deal. I am not making that deal at this point. Now, it's not a low risk, high reward because you are trading a top prospect for him, which again, I wouldn't do, but I'm not, it's not about not wanting to do it because of the prospect. I can care less. It's just that I don't want to trade for Luis Robert, and you need him to be an important offensive piece to this team, because pretty good chance that if you get Luis Robert, it might take you out of the Cody Bellinger situation. If I have an option of Cody Bellinger or Luis Robert, I'm taking Cody Bellinger. So that's my concern. Now, if David Stearns doesn't care and you're going to sign Pete Alonso, Cody Bellinger, and get Luis Robert, great. But now you still need pitching. So, that is where I think the more of the possibility of, if you get Luis Robert to play center field, he'd be a great defender. No problem with that. But you're definitely going to have to bring in probably 2 bats. because I don't think you could say, oh, well, Luis Robert is one of our bats, and now let's bring back Bellinger or Schwarber or Pete Alonso, and, Yeah, exactly, Joel. And Robert is making $20 million with the team option. So it's tough. But I wouldn't do it at this point. I think he made more sense at the trade deadline last year than now. Even though I do think that he would be better than what numbers he put up, because I think the change of scenery would make a difference to him. Again, not saying that he doesn't deserve blame of how he played, but he was playing for a White Sox team that basically wasn't really trying to win here. And that's no excuse. He's getting paid to play. But I do think a change of scenery would do wonders for him. How much wonders and how good, yet to be determined. It's too much of a risk, in my point. Now, in my opinion, I think if you get Robert Jr., you got to get another big bat in here, possibly two. But would that take you more out of the running of other starting pitchers? That is more concerning to me, right? Everybody wants to talk about the offense, how the offense wasn't as good as it was in 2024, but it was still good enough where all you needed was reliable starting pitching. And I'm not talking about good starting pitching. I'm talking about reliable starting. Somebody that can give you a quality start of five innings, 4 runs. We couldn't even get that. We were getting 2 innings, 3 innings consistently. And I think if you would have just got a reliable starter at the deadline, you'd probably be in the playoffs. Nothing special. You just need a reliable starter that can go out there every 50 and give you innings and put decent performances up, which you didn't get. So it's just a huge problem that I think you have to really focus in on what was the problem last year. And again, when you got rotation openings and, you got to make those moves. You got you got position player options that, openings that you need to fill. Bullpen is starting to come together a little bit. So it is important to understand why what they do has to relate or connect to what they're going to do overall. You got to put a roster together, no matter which way it is. It's got to make sense. It can't be a mixture of, a lot of good players and you think it's just going to work. It's got to work. It's got to connect. And that is what the main goal is, in my opinion. Baseball mind, catcher, center field, and pitching. Catcher is your Francisco Alvarez. I'm not the biggest fan of Francisco Alvarez. I think he is a head case. And I still don't trust him. But I don't think the Mets are going to look for a catcher. It's going to be Francisco Alvarez. You got Luis Torrens, which is a very solid backup. So I think catcher is solidified right now. Yes, when it comes to center field, when it comes to second base, even though second base is you got second base already, that's out. Simeon's your second baseman. And pitching, of course, bullpen starter. So center field and starting pitching and bullpen. That is where you got to go right now when it comes to what needs to be done. Sorry, Mr. Classic. Yeah, I agree, and I think the Mets are in it on Tatsuya Imai. I think they are. I think they're going to be one of the favorites to try to land him. So if you get Imai, now it does make more sense to probably sign a Valdez instead of trading for a Joe Ryan or a Skubal. Even though I still do either one. But I think Imai is going to be a good pitcher. You see the confidence. You hear the confidence when he talks about, I want to beat the Dodgers, and he's not afraid of coming on the East Coast. This is a guy I think is very confident. Now, I mean, he can end up being a complete disaster, but I'm willing to take that risk. I think this guy is confident. I don't think he's afraid of the lights, the big moments. I think he is the type of guy that goes out there and takes care of business. And I like that type of guy. Now, it doesn't mean he's going to pitch well, but I like that mentality where he's not afraid of the Dodgers. He is not afraid to come to the East Coast, the Northeast, and be in a big spotlight. I love that. Get him. Get him. And again, I still think, I said this from the beginning, and me and Chris talked about it many times on a hot stove. We've talked about this. We both believe the Mets are going to get 2 top-line starters. If that is a Joe Ryan, if that's a Skubal, if that's a Peralta, if that's a Valdez, I think you're going to see whatever mixture of top starters, and I'm not just talking about aces, I'm talking about top 1 or 2 starters. I do think the New York Mets are going to get 2 of those guys. It makes too much sense to get 2 of those guys because you can really work with making sure, because again, we're all excited about Nolan McLean, right? Nolan McLean was the guy that everybody wanted to see earlier in the year when the Mets were in June, when they were falling apart pitching wise. Nolan McLean should have been up here early, but they were worried about his innings and not being rookie status and losing a year of control, blah, 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 and all that nonsense. The non-winning mentality, which I think David Sturridge ran last year, running this team. You got to get to it. And what it does, you got to get 2 starting pitchers, top line starters, 1 or 2s. Because what it does, it protects Nolan McLean. Because, could we be honest here, guys? We all are excited about Nolan McLean, but we have no idea what he's going to be. Let's stop acting like he's a Cy Young guy and he's a great pitcher, because we've seen very little of him. All right? What did he do? 10 starts last year? This is where teams are going to start having a book on him at the major league level. They're going to adjust to him. To remain in the big leagues and to become a starter that we hope Nolan McLean is going to be, he's got to adjust to what they adjust to what he throws. And that's when you will see if Nolan McLean takes that next level. Because we can't expect that to be guaranteed. That is where I get annoyed at people, especially Met fans, that already claim Nolan McLean as this ace. Don't play that game, because if you're talking like that, then you know what? Don't get any of these top line starters. Live in that bed that you made. This is a guy that's still learning. I think he's going to be good, but until he does it, don't tell me he is what we don't know yet. That is the problem. Get reliable, get proven talent in this rotation. And if McLean becomes a star, great. You got the proven guys with the up-and-comer. Perfect. A great combination that everybody seems to want, except for the Mets. Get it done. 2 top-line starters, 1 or 2 type pitchers, and throw Nolan McLean. Nolan McLean shouldn't be a number 2 starter right now. He should be a number 3 who is developing into a top starter. You got to have protection. You cannot roll with Nolan McLean as your number 2 because it's a dangerous game to play. Because if he takes a step back, you as a rotation are fucked. You are in a bad spot, and it's a dangerous game to play. You cannot be looking at a starting pitcher at the deadline. This needs to be solidified in the offseason. What you want to have going into a trade deadline is either looking for a bat or looking for bullpen arms. You shouldn't be looking for this, that, and that. You shouldn't need a starter, a top-line starter. You shouldn't need a bullpen arm and a bat, because you're not going to get all that. Let's not fool ourselves here. You want to limit the amount you need at the deadline. That is why the offseason for the New York Mets is so important when it comes to this offseason and what they got to do. Solidify this rotation so there's less question marks in this rotation. Now, barring injury, because injuries happen and that you can't predict. But if you get 2 top starters in here with Nolan McLean, and you can finagle David Peterson or, Clay Holmes or whoever whatever. You want to know that as long as there are no injuries, your starting rotation is not an opening or a hole that you need to fill at the deadline. Try to limit your trade deadline to 1 or 2 things. It's easier to get 2 things at the deadline than 3 or 4. That is where the New York Mets got to do what they need to do, solidify parts of this roster. Now, if you want to go 2 big bats and bring back Edwin Diaz to solidify a bullpen in your lineup, and you're just going to get one top starter to pair with Nolan McLean. Okay, I'm not going to be against that at all. I think that's still a fine offseason. But what it does, it makes you probably have a hole at the deadline, again, barring injuries, to get a starter at the deadline. You want to limit your options or needs when it comes to the deadline. You don't need to try to get 3 or 4 things at the deadline because there's a pretty good chance you're not going to do that. So that's where we are with that. And Kev, exactly when it comes to Tong needs a third pitch. We said that for a while, and he does have a third pitch. It's just not developed yet. And, he's got a nice fastball, but the fastball means nothing if none of your breaking pitches are developed enough. Because major league hitters are going to spit on that and wait for your fastball. You could throw 110. If they're looking for a fastball, they will hit it. So he needs to develop his second pitch and probably a third pitch. He's a guy that's relying on probably using that fastball for strikeouts for the most part and to surprise hitters. But you can't do that if your curveball or your slider isn't developed yet. So, yeah, that is why I'm willing to trade Jonah Tong. Not because I don't think he'll be a successful pitcher. It's just that if you can use Tong and keep Sproat, possibly, and, work around that package of Jonah Tong with maybe a Williams or something else for whatever trade, a Skubal, Joe Ryan, whatever, you do it. Because I'm pretty certain that Jonah Tong, if he does develop another pitch successfully, I don't want to wait until July or August to help this rotation. I want to have the rotation for the most part set in the offseason. I don't want to be looking for starting pitching and hoping Jonah Tongs develops into something or possibly Brandon Sproat. And then if they don't, now you got to be looking for a starter. You got to look for a bullpen. So much craziness. So that is something that you still have to look at when it comes to what's going to go on with the New York Mets and what they're trying to do here. Well, again, Diaz is meeting with the Dodgers tonight. That's fine. It's whatever. I don't think that Diaz is signing on the dotted line. His last call will be to Steve Cohen. And I know people are saying, and reports are saying that David Stearns doesn't want to go to a 5th year. If Cohen steps in, Diaz is getting a 5th year from the New York Mets. That I have no doubt about it. Now, if Cohen is allowing David Stearns to do all this negotiating and not stepping in, then yeah, he'll probably be a Dodger. But, again, this goes back to the Pete Alonso conversation. Same thing goes for Diaz. No, Chris, I didn't say Lance Skubal. I'm talking about the Joe Ryan situation. Skubal is going to take Tong, Williams, Clifford, probably like 4 guys in your top 10, maybe 5 in your top 15. So, it's similar to the Pete Alonso situation with Edwin Diaz. Met fans are, they're in this tunnel vision of the Mets can't win a World Series unless Pete Alonso's on his team. They're starting to talk the same way about Edwin Diaz. Now, I think Edwin Diaz is more important to this team to sign than Pete Alonso. I think it's easier to find a big bat than it is a top closer, clearly. But when it comes to Edwin Diaz, the tunnel vision Met fan says, well, if you don't sign Edwin Diaz, the Mets can't win a World Series. That is nonsense. You can sign Robert Suarez and you could still have a really damn good back of the bullpen with Williams and Suarez. Suarez wasn't as good as Diaz, but he was damn close. He was probably the second best, third best closer in baseball. So you're bringing in Devin Williams as a setup man with Robert Suarez. You can do a lot worse. You can win with that. But, of course, I would rather have Edwin Diaz here. So, again, Met fans got to get out of that tunnel vision of, oh my God, Pete Alonso's gone. How are the Mets going to win? Which is nonsense. And the same thing goes for Edwin Diaz. Even though, again, I still believe Edwin Diaz is more important than Pete Alonso, because you see what happens when you get the pitching you need, because it gets the job done. Like we seen it, and my camera just went out, and I apologize for that. Just give me a couple of minutes. I'm gonna still talk. I think you guys can still hear me, but I'm just gonna go to my laptop camera, which sucks, but it is what it is. We'll deal with it at the moment, and we'll get it done. Let's see. Can I get it? Give me a second, guys. Sorry about that. My cat knocked out my my camera wire. That's funny. That's all right. Is what it is, guys. Just give me 1 second. So I'll just keep talking until my camera starts back up again, because he pulled out the wire. Yeah, it's the cartoon Rob. Yes, it is. So when my camera comes back, I'll put it back on, but you guys can hear me. So that's the important part. Who the hell wants to see my big face, right? So, but yeah, and I think my camera's back. Yep, there we go. All right, there we go, guys. See? Yeah, he was actually just running around a little bit playing with his toy, and he just kind of walked into the wire, and he just grabbed it and had to get it. Sorry about that. So yeah, so exactly what I was saying, guys. Like the tunnel vision of Met fans, and again, this is for all fan bases, right? Every fan base has this tunnel vision of certain players. If you don't have this player, you're not going to win, and it's nonsense. You can win in many different ways. I think we've seen that over the last couple of years as the Rangers are winning. A couple of years, a few years ago with the Braves, and the you see the Blue Jays make the World Series. The Dodgers winning back-to-back years. The Dodgers, 2 years ago, it was all about their offense, beating up people, bludgeoning them with their offense. This year, it was their pitching. All their pitching got healthy right before the playoffs, and their pitching dominated. Like, their starting pitching was so good that their terrible bullpen wasn't even a reality. They didn't even have to worry about that. That their bad bullpen that was terrible all season, they didn't have to worry about that, because they used guys in their rotation with all their luxury starting pitching that they had, and all their logjam of starting pitching of good pitchers. They used in the bullpen. Their starting pitcher was so good that they didn't have to use that terrible bullpen mostly at all. They had to use it at times, but they didn't use it in as much as everybody else. So, and David, I agree with you. Diaz is better than Suarez, but don't act like Suarez is a scrub. Diaz was probably the second or third best closer in baseball. Like, that is how good he was. Like, let's just look at Robert Suarez's numbers. Let's just look at it really quick. All right, here we go. All righty. He had a 2.97 ERA this year. Oh my God, he's terrible, right? That's how we're going to look at it, right? All right. 2.97 ERA. He had 40 saves, 69 innings. He was damn good, right? His let's go to good numbers. Whip of under a 1. 75 strikeouts, which is more than a strikeout in an inning. 16 walks, 6 home runs in 69 innings. Like, great numbers. Like, it's really good numbers. Like, you can do a lot worse than Robert Suarez. Like, if the backup to not sign in Edwin Diaz for whatever reason, and they get Robert Suarez, I'm sorry, you're not going to suffer. You're not. Robert Suarez is one of the top closers in baseball, and you're pairing him with another guy who is a top closer 2 years ago, who is now a setup man. You could do a lot worse. Chris, well, it could happen. It definitely could happen with that. Yeah, exactly. It's a great point. They got Scott, they got Kirby Yates, and they were both like Scott was healthy for the most part, but he sucked, and Kirby Yates was hurt all year. So like those are the two best guys in the offseason. So you got to be careful like that. And Nick Martinez, I mean, he's a solid pitcher. He's not great, but the Mets don't have a problem with the back end of the rotation. They're going to have enough back end of the rotation guys. The problem with their issue was getting top starters. You need reliable top two starters for sure, and you need a solid number 3. The Mets top of the rotation is a problem. The back end of the rotation is fine. Like you could do a lot worse than Clay Holmes, David Peterson, and let's say, pick a 5th guy, Brandon Strode or somebody like that. Like the Mets are going to be fine in the back end of the rotation. It's the top of the rotation that's the problem. Nolan McLean is not enough. I truly think Nolan McLean plus another big starter still is fine, but I'd rather have 2 top starters and have Nolan McLean work into that great pitcher we all think he could be. Not, count on him so much that if he has a hiccup, you're going to have to rely on somebody else at that point. Now, I can't have that. You can't have that. Sure, Kev, of course that, but you can say that about any player, right? Only a few years ago, we were talking about Diaz couldn't handle New York, right? We all remember that conversation in 2019 and, probably 2021 as well. Like it took Diaz a couple of years to really figure out the big stage. We were talking about Diaz not being able to handle New York. So I'm not telling you that this guy or that guy can or can't handle New York. We don't know that. But I'm not afraid of making the move because of that. That is stupid. You can't determine this guy can play in New York or this guy can't. I'm sorry to say, but you can't know that until it happens. If it happens, well, it sucks. But you don't know that. There's great players that can play in this town. But that does not mean you stop signing that guy because you just don't know. We just don't know. And until we know, I'm not afraid of signing somebody. That is why I want Diaz back, because he played in New York. He was successful. And to have that Williams-Diaz combination is elite. But let's not make no mistake about it. Yeah, Diaz is better than Suarez, but a Suarez-Williams combination is very damn good. You could do a lot worse in your bullpen, in the back end of the bullpen, than Williams and Suarez. Yeah, it might be a slight downgrade, but how much? So am I going to be mad Diaz will leave? Sure. But I'm not going to cry saying, oh my God, we can't win without Diaz. Another situation with the tunnel vision of Met fans thinking that you can't win without Diaz and you can't win without Pete Alonso. It is the stupidest conversation that people have. Do I want Diaz? Yeah, absolutely. But stop making like one guy is going to make or break a team. And not going to, like, we all forget. If it wasn't for Vientos, Lindor, and Iglesias in 2024, we wouldn't have gone nowhere. And, of course, Sean Manaea and Luis Severino. Right? Where was Pete Alonso in that conversation? Where was Nimmo, being cold for 3 months? You can win without guys that you think is like God to these teams. They're not. They're not. So if you're going to say on this channel, in the chat, that, oh, we can't win without Pete Alonso or we can't win without Edwin Diaz, you're nuts. Like, we all know how baseball works. Look, would I want Diaz to be in this closer role? Absolutely. But you can do a lot worse with a guy who had 40 saves last year in Robert Suarez and who was on a team that was damn good. So let's make sure we understand that before we die. And David, I agree with you. 2024 was a lucky year. I completely agree with that. Completely agree with that. But you know what? Even with that successful year, Edwin Diaz wasn't as good as in 2024 than he was last year. And how did last year Edwin Diaz help us? Didn't we win 83 games? Didn't we miss the playoffs? How in a year that Diaz was less productive in 2024, the Mets went to Game 6 of the NLCS. But last year, Diaz was basically untouchable. And the Mets won 83 games and missed the playoffs. So tell me again how the Mets can't make the playoffs without Edwin Diaz. The Mets made the playoffs with a bad down year from Pete Alonso in 2024. Pete Alonso had a great year this year, and we missed the playoffs in 183 games. So don't tell me you can't make the playoffs, or you can make the playoffs without Pete Alonso or Edwin Diaz. You can. So stop that logic and stop that nonsense of saying that you can't make the playoffs without those guys. You can. 2024, luck or not, they made the playoffs without a dominant year from Pete Alonso and a subpar year. I mean, Diaz was good, but he wasn't electric like he was in 2025. We can do that. We can. So the world is not ending because Diaz might not be on this team or Pete Alonso might not be on this team. Stop with this tunnel vision. Oh my God, we can't win without these guys. It's stupid conversation. It's a stupid argument because it's not true. All right. So Framber Valdez. Obviously, this ties into what are the Mets going to do. Like, I don't think trading for a top starter is stopping the Mets from signing a Framber Valdez. If the Mets sign or trade for Joe Ryan, Framber Valdez is still on the table. You know, for months, we've heard reports and nobody backtracked on these reports. You know, you talk about Heyman, Sherman, Passan, Martino, everybody say that they all believe the Mets are going to get 2 top-line starting pitchers. That hasn't waived at all. So that's why the best interest of the Mets is to trade for a starter and sign a starter. You paired both of those top 2 starters with Nolan McLean, you're talking about a really, really damn good rotation. And now you have a back end of the rotation with Clay Holmes, David Peterson, possible Brandon Sproat, Christian Scott. So many options there. That is what the Mets have to do. Zach Gallen too. I mean, he can be probably I think Zach Gallen's going to sign a 1-year deal. That's a possibility as well. You know, Zach Gallen had a somewhat of a down year. You know, he pitched better later in the year. But again, you could do a lot worse than Zach Gallen. You know, again, Zach Gallen is probably better than everybody the Mets have in this rotation right now. And yes, that's including Nolan McLean. Because Nolan McLean is not proven yet. He's pitched 10, 11 starts. Let's not go crazy and throw him in the Hall of Fame yet. So, yeah. Everybody we talk about here, you can bring up a name. They're better than every Mets pitcher that they have. So, yes, it's an upgrade. All right. Let's see. All right. So, Framber Valdez, I think, is a strong possibility. You know, that was the rumor that came out, a week and a half ago, not just about Hector Gomez, but John Heyman wrote in an article. Again, he wrote a lot in that article, but he wrote in the article very briefly that, you know, the Mets are one of the favorites to land Framber Valdez. And then you heard the Hector Gomez, 6 years, $200 million, blah, blah, blah. No, David, it's not about being sold on Nolan McLean, but stop acting like this guy is a proven talent. He's not. 10 starts, I can wipe my ass with. All right? I'm sorry to say that, but it's true. That means I'm not saying Nolan McLean is not going to be a very damn good to top-line starter. But don't make an off-season decision saying, oh, well, McLean's going to be that guy, and we're only going to pair him with like a Valdez or a Skubal. Because if Nolan McLean takes a step back, guess what's going to happen? Now you're in trouble. You can't rely on Nolan McLean and one other top starter. And if Nolan McLean takes a step back, you're very much in trouble because now you got to rely on Clay Holmes more or David Peterson more or a Brandon Sproat or a Christian Scott or somebody else in the back end of the rotation. It doesn't make sense. I agree with you, David. He does have the makeup. But makeup, you can put on a pig and make it look pretty. Performance does. 10 starts doesn't get me excited. I see the potential, but don't we say this all the time about prospects? We always see potential. Look at Mark Vantos as a perfect example. The guy was a big part of the 2024 Mets offense. And what did he do last year? Don't think for a second that Nolan McLean can't take a step back. Now, he all takes a huge step forward. That's what we all hope for. But we don't win games on hope. Can we please understand that? Met fans are delusional with that nonsense. Delusional. There's Met fans on Twitter right now that are saying we shouldn't trade Jonah Tong for Joe Ryan. And these are guys that are content creators and you know what? I respect the hell out of them, but they're nuts. Joe DeMayo, who's an awesome reporter, does a great job with the prospects and everything like that. But he also agreed with Draftneck Mark that they wouldn't trade Joe Tong for Joe Ryan. Like, I'd love to have both of them on the channel on X and Y. Because that is nuts. You can pray to the high heavens. You hope Jonah Tong can be Joe Ryan. But we don't know that yet. The guy hasn't developed another secondary pitch. Why are we waiting for Jonah Tong to hopefully develop something that we know Joe Ryan is already? It's so ridiculously stupid. And this is not a direct hit on Mark or Joe. They're great at what they do. I respect the hell out of them. But they need to understand. Like, I just don't understand the logic. Give me the proven talent every single time when you're talking about trying to get better. Because prospects are the definition of an unknown. You know what Joe Ryan is. He's a top 2 starter, possibly can be even better. We see Nolan McLean and the potential. But to play games and think he can't take a step back is a delusional Met fan that is not paying attention. Like we haven't seen it before. And PJ, you might say Rob's wrong. What am I wrong about? Saying that Nolan McLean is unproven on 10 starts? Come on. I mean, that's stupidity. All right. Dolo, would I trade Tong for? Yes, absolutely. If that's a straight up trade, which I don't think is possible. I mean, I do it in a heartbeat. But there's people, and again, respected content creators, reporters that do great work. And I've met Mark multiple times. I met Joe a couple of times. These guys are good guys. Nothing against them. I'm against their opinion about this, which, again, the great part about sports is that we have different opinions. You can argue different opinions and still respect the guy, which I respect those guys. I really do. They're awesome. I take Joe DeMayo at his word. I take Mark at his word. But if you wouldn't trade a potential a top 2 starter over a prospect who was overmatched last year, who doesn't have a secondary pitch developed yet, is crazy to me. I would drive Jonah Tong to Minnesota. Minneapolis, Minnesota. Right at Target Field. Right in the front door. Front door service. You're nuts. Because we all hope that Jonah Tong would be close to Joe Ryan. That is the hope. But again, find me a winning team that relies on hope and wins. I would love to keep all these guys. But realistically, you got to start getting proven talent in here. Or make a decision on these guys. That is the biggest frustration with a lot of these prospects. Make a decision. Jonah Tong was overmatched last year. Brought up way too early. Do I think Jonah Tong can be a good pitcher? Absolutely. But can and hope doesn't mean proven. Joe Ryan is proven to be a top starter. Why are we afraid of giving up prospects? The guy's going from Minnesota, for Christ's sake. If he becomes a great pitcher, well, you know what? In 5-6 years, sign him. How about that? Like, it's just amazing to me sometimes. Like, is there an ulterior motive that I'm not aware of with some Met fans? Because, again, I truly believe there's some Met fans that would rather lose and complain than win and be happy. Unfortunately. And not those guys. I'm just saying in general. We should not gamble on Ryan. Why? You want to gamble on Nolan McLean with 10 starts? Joe Ryan is not a gamble. He's proven. PJ, it's not about being negative. You know, when you speak facts, it sounds negative. But what is there to be positive about the New York Mets, guys? Can anybody explain that to me? Did we have win a World Series in the last 39 years that I missed? No. Did we have a terrible, embarrassing season last year? Did we go into 2024 in a quote-unquote transitional year, having a surprise NLCS appearance with a lot of luck? Or did we win and I just missed a lot of it? Stop trying to spin positive with this team where was the positive? Starting pitching, trash. Bullpen, trash. Half the lineup, garbage. Like, why are we being positive about a roster that is continuing to lose? Again, Met fans, do you want to win? If you want to have positive talk all day, every day, because it makes you feel better, it doesn't tell the real story. You want fake news. You want positive attitude about a team that won 83 games with so much potential and being one of the top teams to win a World Series last year, to win 83 games and missed out on the playoffs to the Cincinnati Reds, then I don't know what you want. You want me to lie to you and give you all this positive content? Where's the positivity? Where is the positive on these teams? There's way too many holes on this team to be positive until it gets filled. Like, I don't understand that. I'm not going to lie to you guys. You want me to be happy and talk positivity when this team won 83 games last year? I'm not. Be better and we'll talk positive. Go back to 2024 from June 1st on. There was a lot of positive talk because they were winning. Losing shouldn't drive positive talk because you're just lying to yourself. And if you want people to lie to you, then find it on the channel. I'm not going to give you bullshit. Chris, I don't like Jose Barrios. I mean, do you want a guy who the Toronto Blue Jays, who went to the World Series, didn't even pitch him? I'm afraid of that type of pitcher, to be honest with you. All right, Jody, the only sugarcoating I want to see. Yeah, I mean, I explode when I'm positive too. But to say that I'm too negative with a team that constantly loses or lose, like, what is there to be positive about? Where were the positives last year? How did a great year from Pete Alonso establish his team to greatness? Because, again, this goes back to the leadership factor. Pete Alonso can have a great year and the Mets can win 83 games. Lindor has an MVP type of season. The Mets win 90 games and make the playoffs. Go to the NLCS. Don't tell me that doesn't matter and that doesn't make a difference. One guy can have great years and the team sucks. A guy can have a great year in Lindor and the team goes on to an NLCS appearance when they weren't expected to go to. So tell me who's been more important or what potential, because we've all watched SNY till the cows come home. How many times have Keith Hernandez, Ron Darling, Gary Cohen, when Lindor is playing well and is hitting, the Mets win games. Do they say that about Pete Alonso and his offense? No. Well, PJ, I agree with you, but again, we're in December 4th. The Mets have traded Brandon Nimmo, brought back Marcus Semien, and traded for a reliever in Devin Williams. Now, I think it's a good start, but until the roster is complete this offseason, what is there to be positive about in a guy in David Stearns I don't trust? But again, if you want me to lie to you and tell you that it's all sunshine and rainbows, at the end of the rainbow, and buy tickets to go to Citi Field to watch a losing Met team, then sure, I do that. But I'm not going to lie to you. I'm going to tell you how I feel. You don't have to agree or like it, but it's just how it goes. Adolis Garcia, if it stops me from getting a Tucker or a Bellinger, no. Tong, Vientos, Luisana, Lacuna. Would I be mad? Yeah. Because what does Acuna do to help this team? Vientos turned into a bust, and Tong is not developed. And you're sending them to Minnesota, who always finds a way to lose. So yeah, I would. Because what nobody can tell me that Tong, Vientos, and Acuna as a package on this team would help this team more than Joe Ryan. By the way, 2 out of the 3 in Vientos and Acuna were basically with this team all year. How did that work out for us? And Jonathan came up later in the year. And also, how did that work out for us? Now, I'm not blaming Tong. He just wasn't ready yet. It's okay. It's not his fault. It was the Mets for putting them in that position. But yeah, I'd be upset. I do think that Tong, Vientos, Acuna, and a Williams could probably get you somebody better. Like you might have to add, Clifford in there as well to get Skubal, and that will make you more happier. But yeah, I would be upset. Oh yeah, easy. I talked about this earlier in the stream about Pete Alonso, right? Once again, he had a great year this year, and me, Mr. Negative, who don't like Pete Alonso, I give credit where credit's due. Pete Alonso had an awesome year, a great year. In a season of Pete Alonso, if this was another player that plays first base and had the numbers that Pete Alonso has, more teams would be after him. Why are we only here, the Red Sox and the Mets? Like, think about that. Like, deep dive into that a little bit. I'm going to tell you why. Because people don't see Pete Alonso as a difference maker on their team. Right? A great season for Pete Alonso helped the Mets to 83 wins. A great season from Lindor and MVP votes got the Mets to 90 wins, a playoff appearance, and Game 6 of the NLCS. Like, think about what. That's why when you go and talk about numbers, it's not all just about that. Why does Lindor numbers put more wins on the board for the Mets than Pete Alonso's great year last year? It's interesting to talk about, but we'll talk about that at a later date. All right, let's see. Before we get into the last 2 topics, yeah. Well, Dolo, here's a perfect example. Kyle Schwarber, who is a DH. Let's be honest. There are more teams after Kyle Schwarber for just power. Like, besides the power and walks, Pete Alonso plays first base. Again, you can say if he's a good first baseman or not. I would say he's above average. But all around had a better year than Kyle Schwarber for the most part. Yet more people are after a career DH guy, an only DH guy, More teams are after Schwarber than they are Pete Alonso, and Schwarber's older. So think about that for a second. So yeah, I agree with you. No, Kev, I understand there might be other teams talking, but you know what? The Mets are talking to everybody. That means they're going to get everybody? No. But the more serious teams right now that we keep on hearing are the Red Sox and the Mets. We heard a little rumblings about the Reds, but that kind of like, cooled off. Now, again, there's always a surprise team, but for a guy who had a great season, who can hit 40 plus home runs, plays a position, there are so many teams that could use that type of power and that production, yet it seems like there's basically less than a handful of teams going after him. It's crazy. It doesn't make sense. That's why you got to have that conversation of why. And we'll probably never know. But we do know teams don't believe Pete Alonso can be a tremendous difference to their team. Like, it's a fact. Like, I'm not lying to you. This is not my opinion. It's just what the league is showing you. All right. I do like Joe Ryan, but Edwin Cabrera is really good, but I don't know if the Marlins are trading him. Hunter Green isn't reliable. He's often hurt. He doesn't pitch enough. Joe Ryan does. So, Hunter Green has electric stuff. He is probably the best pitcher out of all those guys you mentioned. But Hunter Green also isn't reliable enough. He's often hurt. Look at his starts. The big risk in Hunter Green isn't the stuff. It is, who cares about the stuff if he's not on the mound? Hunter Green isn't reliable. And I know, David, you probably didn't look at the games he pitched. He missed a lot of games. So you got to be wary of that too. All right, so let's go to the next topic, and that is, does the Williams deal impact the Diaz pursuit? I don't think it does. I think it's a smart move in any sense where you solidify, you have a backup. You sign Devin Williams just in case Diaz signs elsewhere. I don't think it hinders the Mets from doing what they want to do, because if they don't get Diaz, I think they're going to sign Suarez. So that's where I don't think it impacts it at all. I just think the Mets don't want to give a fifth year to Diaz. That is their own logic, mentality of the situation. I don't think Devin Williams signing here or not means they would, if Devin Williams wasn't here, the Mets still probably wouldn't want to give Diaz a fifth year. So I think it's more about the year than about Devin Williams. Fairbanks already signed. He's the Detroit Tiger. Rogers would be nice too. If you bring in Rogers in here, now you got Minter and Rogers as your lefties. That is, like I said, if you can bring in Diaz and Rogers, I mean, you got one of the best bullpens in baseball, on paper, of course, right? You got Minter, you got Raley, you got Devin Williams. You bring in Diaz and Tyler Rogers, I mean, that's a damn good bullpen right there. So I don't think directly the Devin Williams signing affects the possibility of bringing back Diaz. I think the fifth year is what's preventing right now Diaz to coming back. That is why he isn't signed yet. Do I think the Mets, again, it depends if Steve Cohen steps in. I think if Steve Cohen steps in, Diaz will be a Met. If he doesn't, I don't think Davis turns his budget on a fifth year. Now, I don't agree with that. I just give the fifth year, and we'll deal with that fifth year if Diaz is not the same in that fifth year. But I think he can still be a top closer in baseball for at least the next 3 years. I think I would survive giving him a fifth year and worry about year 4 and 5 when we get there. But I'm not going to concern myself that Diaz is not going to be a top closer the next 3 years. Because, yeah, would I like to get Diaz on a 4-year deal? Absolutely. But sometimes it's not realistic. And I don't think you can lose Diaz to the Dodgers. I think it's stupid. But we will see. But as a topic of conversation, the Williams deal does not affect bringing back Edwin Diaz. The 5th year that has been a stickler that's been reported between the two is the bigger problem. All right, guys. So in a few days, starting off the weekend or Monday mostly, we got the winter meetings. We'll see if any other moves happen, free agent signings, trades for the Mets to add to their roster before the winter meetings. If not, we're going to have a tremendous amount of coverage. In the winter meetings, we're going to have winter meetings watch parties. We're going to have hot stoves. We're going to have Mets Talk Lives. It's going to be a lot of live shows over the next 5, 6, 7 days. The next week is going to be insane how much live streams we're going to do. With my work schedule, unfortunately, if I'm at work, it's going to be hard to go live if breaking news happens, but there's going to be MLB winter meetings, watch parties, Mets hot stoves, myself, Chris, probably try to get other people on just to get more people's opinions and all that fun stuff. But as I said on the last hot stove, one of my predictions is that either Jeff McNeil or Kodai Senga is going to be traded or off this team by the winter meetings. Now, we're a few days away from there, so I might be wrong. But I do feel that McNeil or Senga are going to be gone fairly recently, at least one of them, possibly two. And another prediction is that I do think the Mets are either going to trade for a starting pitcher or sign one. And I'll give you a few names. I do think Joe Ryan is very seriously a possibility. And I do think Framber Valdez to go on the free agent side is another possibility. So I would not be shocked if Joe Ryan or Framber Valdez is a New York Met by the end of the winter meetings. I feel like those two things could possibly happen. So with that said, guys, I want to thank you for tuning in to Mets Talk Live Hot Stove Edition on the channel. Make sure you hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel if you're a new watcher of the channel. And tune in probably sometime Sunday maybe when the winter meetings start to kick off for a Mets Hot Stove. We'll get into everything we need to talk about before the winter meetings really get going. And, I'll see you next time, guys. So have a great night, guys. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Enjoy the Friday coming up. Have a good night, guys. Let's go Mets. And I'll see you next time, guys. Have a great night.
Rob on the mic, spitting truth from the heights. Queens unite under stadium lights. Bright nights, 7 train rides. Dreams born in the real hum. Brooklyn to Queens, yeah, we all about that outcome. This our time, this our cheer. Mets Talk Live, bring the hype, make it clear. From the boroughs to the field, this our year. Queens in the house, let the world hear.